Sometimes utility lands can either help make or break a game. But how many slots do people actually have dedicated to utility lands? Let's take a look. What's up, Commander players? My name's Matt, and you're watching Top Commander. So, utility lands. In the game of Magic, especially in the Commander format, we have a lot of lands to pick from. From tap lands, guild gates, fetch lands, etc., etc. But one slot that I feel like a lot of people don't utilize very much is utility lands. Which, when I say utility lands, I'm talking about the lands that they normally don't tap for any color of mana. They typically only tap for a one colorless, and they have another line of text where they have an activated ability to do something. So let's take a look at some of these and see, maybe there's some that you should be running, especially for new players. New players typically don't run these because they're more worried about, oh, just produce mana so you can cast your spells. Very true. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying mess up your mana base, but especially in Commander, you could usually dedicate about 4 slots to utility lands. But before I get into that, if you wish to support this channel, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support this channel directly, be sure to visit patreon.com/topcommander. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into it. So, a lot of these lands, I don't know what it is. A lot of people don't run a lot of these lands. So, like I said, these are utility lands. They typically don't tap for a color. They tap for one colorless and have another line of text that does something. But I feel like a lot of people don't utilize this enough at all. Let's take a look at an example. So, Homeward Path is a land that taps for 1 diamond mana, or you either tap it and each player gains control of all creatures he or she owns. So, Homeward Path is a really good example of a utility land. Let's say you have a deck where a lot of things are going on, maybe Aminatou, and you ultimate her and you shift control of it to somebody. Or the new Jin, which was just printed, I believe, in the Jumpstart product, where you have shenanigans afoot, where you can switch, you rotate everything around the table, or maybe you just have somebody in your play group that likes playing control magic. Homeward Path is a utility land to help you with that, because then it just resets everything. So there's some shenanigans you can do with this, yes, but if you're just looking at getting your stuff back because somebody keeps stealing it off your board with, any kind of like treachery effect or anything like that where they just snatch stuff off your board, Homeward Path is a way to get around that. It helps you so much, and it's a utility land. So why are people not running a whole lot of Homeward Path? Maybe there's not a lot of control magic. I could see the argument for that. But what's the argument for Sunhome Fortress? Now, mind you, this one is a little bit color specific. So Sunhome Fortress of the Legion is a land that taps for 1 colorless, or the activated ability is 2 generic, a red, and a white, so you have to be in red and white. Tap it, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Now, just because this is a land that uses red and white does not necessarily mean that you have to have this in a Boros deck. Is there a Boros deck that could use this? Potentially. But I know that a lot of people will talk about how Boros has problems ramping and things like that. I'll probably do a separate video on that entirely, because I have a feather deck that ramps with no problem, and a mono white deck that ramps with no problems. I will have a separate video for that one, because I have arguments for that one. Alright, but talking about the utility land. So Sunhome Fortress has an activated ability that gives a creature double strike until end of turn. Now it's just target creature, so you could target one of your creatures. Or, if you want to get political at the table, depending on how casual the table is, or if you just really want to be chaotic about it, if somebody swings at one of your opponents and you just feel like, hey, I'm going to give your creature double strike now just to help you out there. But I'm going to help you out there, buddy. Which I know people that would do that in a heartbeat. That's neither here nor there, though. But yeah, so why would you not run this? Especially if you're in, like, let's say you're in Naya. So a Naya deck is green, red, white. Green has all the ramp and all the big creatures. You splash in red and white, and you have a deck that can potentially do a bunch of combat tricks. Geared Conclave Exile is a really good Naya commander, especially because he likes big tokens. So you give something double strike, and you're crashing in for a lot of damage. It's just a utility land that can help get an opponent out quicker. If maybe you have an opponent that's going off and they're doing a lot of crazy shenanigans and you need to get them under control, this is a land that can help you get that person closed out of the game quicker. So that way you have a chance to win. Am I saying be super competitive? Absolutely not. But when it comes down to it, Sunhome Fortress is a good land. You can use it politically. It gives your creatures a really great advantage by getting double strike if they didn't have it before. These are just things to think about. Now, in the same section of Sunhome Fortress, I'm pretty sure that most people have heard of Kessig Wolfrun. So it taps for a colorless mana, and then you can pay X and a red and a green, tap it, target creature gets plus X plus O, and gains trample until end of turn. This is one that a lot of people know about very well. It probably does see a good amount of play. I hardly see people drop this on the field, myself personally. But with that aside, especially because I believe this one also just got reprinted in the Commander 2020 product. So, Kessig Wolfrun, I feel like is one that I personally don't see it enough. But I could be wrong. There probably is a bunch of people playing it. But with something along those lines, how many people are playing Skarg the Rage Pits? Think of this as a budget alternative to Kessig Wolfrun. So this one taps for a colorless, and then you can pay a red and a green, tap it, target creature gets +1/+1, and gains trample. Now, granted, it's only a +1 bump, but you're getting the power and the toughness. And you get the trample. So, why not run both? In all honesty. Especially because, I mean, if you think about it, you want redundant effects in your deck. So, if you don't have your Kessig Wolfrun, do you have to suffer without that utility land? No, you don't. Because if you have Skarg the Rage Pits, you get a similar effect to your Kessig Wolfrun. Now, granted, it's not as game-winning. It doesn't have the ability to win you the game as much as Kessig Wolfrun, but just that little bump could be just enough. Now, how many people are out there running against somebody that runs a lot of hexproof Narset, anything like that. Anything that's like hexproof, Shroud. Think about this. How many people are using Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots? This is another utility land. Detection Tower. Now, it came out in M19, so it's relatively new, and it's relatively cheap, if I'm not mistaken. It's maybe a couple of bucks, like $2-3 at most, which I don't think it was even that high. But Detection Tower, again, taps for a colorless. Pay 1 mana, tap it. Until end of turn, your opponent's and creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be the target of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. So Detection Tower is a great utility land that just gets rid of hexproof. I'm sorry, you can't be targeted. No, you now can be targeted. Detection Tower is a great utility land. People should be running it. Or, now it's not too much more. It's like, I believe, so when it comes to these two lands, because they do similar things, Detection Tower is the rare from M19 that costs like maybe $1. It's like maybe $1, maybe a little bit less, depending on where you're shopping. But your local game store will probably have it in the bulk rare cards. This one is an uncommon that they might actually have in the binder. It's Arcane Lighthouse. And yes, it is an uncommon. This was from one of the previous Commander sets. I don't remember off the top of my head which year. But again, this is a utility land that you should probably be running if you're having problems with Hexproof and Shroud. Tap, add a colorless mana to your mana pool. Pay 1 and tap it until end of turn. Creatures your opponents control lose Hexproof and Shroud and can't have Hexproof or Shroud. So Arcane Lighthouse gets rid of Hexproof and Shroud, but from your opponent's creatures. Now, would I say run one over the other? I would say run Arcane Lighthouse over Detection Tower, but why not both? Now, the reason why Arcane Lighthouse is good is because people still use Lightning Greaves. Lightning Greaves gives Shroud. So, yeah, you might want to have that Arcane Lighthouse for that. Now, however, if your opponent is running stuff like Shalai, Voice of Plenty, or the Heroic Intervention, Lazotep Plating, it says that you, the player, gets hexproof. Arcane Lighthouse does not get around that, because it's only for the hexproof or shroud that your opponent's creatures control. Now, Detection Tower will get rid of the hexproof from your opponent and your opponent's creatures. So, I guess it's kind of however you feel about this, whichever adjusts according to your meta. But 9 times out of 10, Arcane Lighthouse is the better one. It's an uncommon that costs $4 or $5. That's more expensive than Detection Tower for a reason, because you see a lot more hexproof and shroud on creatures than you do see hexproof on the players. For the most part. I'm not saying there's a play group where somebody is doing some crazy shenanigans doing this all the time. Now, what if I told you that you could use your lands to produce tokens as well? There's a couple of ways to do that. Now, this one, I was actually kind of surprised when I looked it up, but I did not realize that the price had jumped this much on TCG Player. Field of the Dead, unfortunately, it's like an $18 card. It's not cheap, but this just came out in M20 last year, and it's already about a $20 land. Should have seen that one coming. I had an idea that it was going to spike. I didn't think it was going to spike this much, because I pre-ordered like 6 copies of this card when it got, I put the pre-order in for like 6 copies when it was like 36 cents, 63 cents. It was something really, really cheap. It was under $1, so I pre-ordered like 6 of them. And apparently it paid off, because they're like $20 a piece now. So, Field of the Dead enters the battlefield tapped, and then you can tap it for colorless mana. That's the end of the story. No, I'm just playing. So, whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, If you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Field of the Dead counts itself for the 7 different named lands. Now, when it comes to this one is a utility land that I really, really like, but for certain decks. You don't have to be a token generating deck. You could be just, I would suggest anything that is 3 or more colors. 3 or more colors is probably a really, really sweet spot for this, because when you look at the mana base for a 3 color and up deck, you don't have a lot of basics in those decks, or you probably have a good number of basics at the 3 color mark, but not higher than that. And when it comes to non-basics, you can only have 1 in the deck. So Field of the Dead is great to include. Even if you're not a creature strategy, even if you don't care about tokens, you may not even be running aristocrats. Even if you're just a spell slinger deck, you could be running Jeskai or a Calamax, like Teamer, just spell sling deck matters, like instants of sorceries. That could be all you're doing. But if you have this kind of a land producing these tokens that's incidental value over time, you can have blockers so you're not wide open. Now you have time and can expend resources other ways instead of just waiting for your opponent to respond all the time. Granted, I know most of those decks do that anyways, but you can't control the entire board the entire time. I know there's people out there that would argue with me that they can. That is fine. I'm just saying, it's not a perfect world. Nobody is 100% the best player, so it doesn't necessarily happen all the time. Field of the Dead just kind of helps fill a void. Now, when it comes to utility lands, this is something else to think about. I've named off a couple of really good utility lands. Now, if you look on the ban list, we have Tolarian Academy. It's a legendary land. It gives you 1 blue mana for each artifact you control. But it's on the ban list. I feel like it shouldn't be on the ban list. That will be a topic for another video entirely. When it comes down to it, though, it probably wouldn't be on the ban list if people ran more land destruction. Now, before people get all mad about this, the Rule 0, the social contract for the casual players, the social contract is no land destruction, but it more specifically mass land destruction. People don't want to see the Armageddon hit the field, because that's not fun. Blowing up everybody's lands is a big no-no. However, knowing that there are problematic lands, look at Glacial Chasm. That thing is a bulk, like $1 at your local game store probably. It's dirt cheap. But it's one of the most annoying and obnoxious lands to see hit the battlefield, because your opponent plays that, they can't take damage. They've now fogged you entirely until it goes away. If you need to kill that person and they have a Glacial Chasm, if you have the means to kill that person, sometimes some targeted land destruction is just what the doctor ordered. Now, what do I mean by targeted land destruction? Look at Strip Mine. Strip Mine taps for a colorless, or you can tap and sacrifice it to destroy a target land. So you're sacrificing this land to get rid of another one. This is just one of those things when you need that, because there are utility lands that work very well. Gaia's Cradle taps for 1, gives your opponent a green for every creature they control. So if you don't have that board wipe, that Gaia's Cradle is tapping for a lot of mana. Serra's Sanctum gives them a wipe for every enchantment they control. So if you don't have that board wipe, you need to get rid of the Sanctum because they're going to get out of control with all that extra mana. There's a reason why I feel like Tolarian Academy should be off the ban list. And I feel like it would be if maybe more people, especially new players. Now, new players, I know that you get all iffy about land destruction. That's fine. But I'm saying if you don't run at least a couple of these pieces, you're not going to have a fun time when your opponent's pumping out 27 billion mana or doing some absurd thing with a utility land that just runs you over, like gives something double strike and then finishes you in one swing. Strip Mine gets rid of any land. It's a good land to have. It's a utility land that gets rid of lands. Wasteland, same thing, only it destroys a target non-basic land. Now this one is a little bit expensive. It's about $27 because it is used in other formats, which I believe it's used in Modern. Strip Mine is about $13. Again, depending on your budget. And there's also Dust Bowl as well. Dust Bowl, you pay 3 mana, tap it, you sacrifice one of your lands, and you destroy a non-basic land. So, those are the more pricey versions. But what if you don't have the budget for that? Well, Ghost Quarter is pennies. Ghost Quarter taps for 1 colorless, or you can tap and sacrifice it, destroy target land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle their library. So at the cost of you sacking a land, you get rid of their problematic land, and they just replace it with a basic. Now their power level just went down, and you trade off 1 for 1, basically. Well, they still have mana available, you don't. So there's some... It doesn't sound great, but would you rather them have that guy's Cradle pumping out 27 mana because they have 27 creatures? Probably not. Another one to look at, Tectonic Edge. Taps for a colorless, pay 1, tap, sacrifice it. Destroy target non-basic land. Activate this ability only if an opponent controls 4 or more lands. This is the more fair version. So, this is not saying, hey, I'm going to just constantly keep blowing up your lands. This is, hey, you've got like 6 lands. One of them's a guy's Cradle. I'm going to kill that now. That's fine. So, Tectonic Edge is just a really good budget alternative. Plus, it has line attacks that makes it seem a little bit more fair. There's also Field of Ruin. You would probably make somebody's day if you play this. Tap and produce a diamond. Well, 1 colorless. Then you pay 2, tap, and sack it. Destroy target non-basic land and opponent controls. Each player searches his or her library for a basic land, puts it onto the battlefield, then shuffles their library. So, when you really look at this, you ramp 2 of your opponents by 1 for free, because it doesn't cost them anything. You sacrifice a land to get rid of one of your opponent's lands, and then to replace the lands that you and your opponent lost, you can each go get a basic. So you ramp 2 of your opponents in Commander with this in your typical 4-player game. 2 of your opponents will ramp by 1 by you using this. But you get rid of their problematic threat. So it's kind of a... Really think about this for a minute. It's one of those... Is it worth it? Is it worth it for them to have 27 billion mana on the field because they have a Gaia's Cradle, maybe a Serra's Sanctum at the same time, or something crazy like that? Probably. So, and that's the last one that I'm going to be talking about for the day. So, when it comes down to it, how many how many people are actually running utility lands? Are you running... And I'm not talking about the Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, Myriad Landscape. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about lands that do something for you, for your deck. Some of these were color locked, so you have to be in 2 colors, like the Kessig Wolf Run, Scars to the Rage Pit. You have to be in red and green. But when you are building a deck, I feel like a lot of people spend more time looking at the cards and not the mana base. Do you want the mana base to work? Absolutely. Spend time working on that mana base. But your average commander deck, you're running a 99 card deck. Your average commander deck, you probably have room for about 4 utility lands. Give or take a few. Depending on how many colors your deck is, you can probably run about 4 different utility lands in your deck. What utility lands are you using? And I'm not talking about the mana fixing or the mana ramp lands. Unless you're running Ancient Tomb. Ancient Tomb is one that I would argue is technically a utility land because it doesn't produce any color, but it does ramp you. So, let me know down in the comments below, what utility lands are you using? Are you using enough utility lands? Did this video help you understand that maybe there's some lands out there that you should be using? But yeah, these are things that people need to think about. I feel like a lot of people don't utilize utility lands. That's a heck of a sentence, huh? Quite as much as they should be. But if you run enough of these, it can help swing the tide of a game for you with no problem. Especially if you built your mana base correctly. You have your ramps package in the deck set up a certain way. You have card draw. You have mana fixing. Then the utility land shouldn't be a problem sliding in the deck somewhere. But let me know down in the comments below, are you using enough utility lands? Are you not using them? Is there a reason why you're not using them? Do you disagree with what I've said at all? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next video.